Everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Bide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet and welcome, everybody. My guest tonight is renowned paranormal investigator Richard Sennett, and his latest book is called Soiled Doves and Painted Ladies of California. It's a story of California prostitution beginning from Gold Rush to the Golden Age of Hollywood, and outlines some of the most notable madams and courtesans that history ever had. It's, in of itself, a very interesting book, and the topic is very interesting, but I got to thinking, too, that the nature of the profession was one of very vacillating emotions, both good and bad. And Richard said that there are many ghost stories linked to brothels, both historically and modern times as well. So this is going to be a really interesting hour, and I can't wait to get started. But just for a reminder, listeners in the chat room, you're welcome to ask questions and comments. And if you're listening live and not in the chat room, you can join us at paraxradionetwork.com. All right, Richard. Hi. I'm glad you're with us again.
Glad to be here.
Well, I kind of did a double take in a good way when I saw the cover of your book. I know that not all your books are ghost related because, you write some really well fiction also. And in your capacity as an established history lecturer and specializing in California history, and being an amazingly good storyteller, there are a lot of subjects to write about. But how did you choose to talk about or write a book about the world's oldest profession?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It came across because of my ghost hunting. And I worked with a unique lady named Oberding in Nevada who was making a TV show about brothels and ghosts in haunted brothels in Nevada, where it's quite legal. And that's where I first started to get kind of focused on the idea that ghosts and brothels seem to go together. And then looking at my research, I found that most of the places that had recurrent spontaneous phenomena had once been brothels, and many of the ghosts were, in fact, working girls who long ago practiced that ancient profession. So I don't know why it is, but it looks like women who take up this life for one reason or another seem to return as ghosts. There could be a lot of reasons for this. I mean, it's a very awful lifestyle, and many women died young. Many took their own lives. A few were murdered. And because of that, I believe that that's why these brothel sites are haunted. Now, this could be places that are active brothels today or were a long time ago. And I found here in California, especially in historic hotels and buildings, many did have a link to prostitution.
Yeah. Now, it was interesting because sometimes the women were called soiled divas, or doves rather, but there was a whole slew of colorful names for them, weren't there? I mean,
Oh, yeah,
dozens.
there really are. Oddly enough, the word they almost never used, except in an insulting way, was the word whore.
Mm-hmm.
And the Victorians defined the word as a woman who sold sex, her body for sex, or two, an unfaithful wife who had sex outside of marriage with other men, or three, a woman who was just downright promiscuous and had sex with all sorts of people if she was married to them or not. And so that it was a broad term, only used insultingly. So oddly enough, they never used that word. They had other words, and one was soiled doves, and harlots from the Bible was another one. They had prairie girls, abandoned girls, angels. That was one very popular in Los Angeles. The fallen angels and angels were used.
Did he go away?
Hello?
Yep, I don't know where you went, but you're back.
Yes, I was cut off for a moment there and came back to it. But no, there was a whole list of different terms. But soiled doves was to show that many of these women were, in fact, pure at heart, only forced into a life they secretly hated. And that was true. Oddly enough, in most cases than not, women didn't choose to become prostitutes. They were literally forced into it because of the way society operated at that time.
Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned the word whore, there was a really funny, probably not at the time, but a real funny story about one of the prostitutes who, because sometimes they carried guns and Italian stilettos and, because, and they weren't afraid to use them. But the story, and maybe you know it better than I do, but I mean, obviously you do. She killed somebody, and I don't want to give away the punchline here. She killed a man, not because he was being mean or anything else, but he called her a name.
Yeah, well, this is the story. You see, there were different kinds of prostitutes. And there was down on the lowest rung of the ladder were dance hall girls, or sometimes called hurdy-gurdy girls. Now, hurdy-gurdy girls would talk to you, they'd kiss you, you could buy them drinks, but they never slept with you. That was this fine line. Why did a girl become a hurdy-gurdy girl? Was essentially to find a husband. And so they did not sleep with the people. This girl was a hurdy-gurdy girl. She was a dance hall girl. A guy was drunk and tried to drag her into the back room and have sex with her. When she refused to go, he beat her up, gave her a black eye, and was yelling at her. Then he left. She was crying. He left, and the whole bar is watching this. And he comes back to, go at it again with her. And she drew out what they called euphemistically a California toothpick, which was a stiletto. Not to be confused with the Arkansas toothpick, which was much broader. And when she drew this out of her garter and struck him in the chest, went right between his ribs and into his heart, killed him instantly. The police were called, and she told them that he had beaten her up. She said, "I don't mind getting a black eye, but he called me a whore." So she killed him. And one of the police asked the people who witnesses, and they said, "Yeah, he was beating on her, and yeah, he called her names." And so what did the police do? They took the knife out of the guy's chest, cleaned it off, and gave it back to her. It was her knife, after all. And then they took the body away. It was called self-defense, which probably was. And the people in the bar all bought her a steak for her black eye and a drink. And that's how life was. So you could get killed really quick by calling someone the wrong name.
Mm-hmm. And there were so many to choose from. Yeah, and a lot of the people were drunk and didn't pay any attention. But you know what? When you think about prostitutes and stuff, that they were, lower down the rich people's nose kind of thing. But I've read that many streets in San Francisco were named after famous prostitutes.
Yeah, there were lots of very famous. Now, these were big business women. You see, when the gold rush started, there was literally 50 men for every one woman. And it was just really wild what was going on. And so consequently, many of them were very successful, became rich, owned several brothels, some even married politicians and stuff like that. So literally, they became the paragon of society.
Mm-hmm. And some of them, I mean, you list some that were very, very famous, some names that we heard of. And, it's just, when people think about prostitution, it's always like dirty and filthy and, real icky. But I don't know, there was kind of like a real interest and it was okay for a while,
Yeah,
I mean.
In early California, it really was.
Mm-hmm.
Quite literally.
Did it start with the gold rush period?
That's what really, really took off because all these people, young men, came to find gold, and there was no women. And they had prostitutes who were Native Americans. They had prostitutes who were Latinos, Asian people. Though the Asian girls were called sing-song girls, and their story was quite awful, actually. Literally becoming a Chinese prostitute was like a death sentence. It was just terrible how they were treated. But it was just quite a big phenomenon. Hello again.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
We dropped it. No, even theaters and restaurants had rooms set aside where you could get a lot more than just what was on the menu. And it was quite a wild situation. And, of course, many times the prostitutes did, in fact, become victims of psychopathic people or got venereal diseases, always a big problem back then. That still is, by the way. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, I was reading sexually transmitted diseases today. Now, in the world, over 1 billion people suffer from some form of sexually transmitted disease.
Oh, 1 billion,
so,
huh?
1 billion, that's a lot of people, folks. But back then, they had no real drugs for them. So they did have mercury, which they could use to cure syphilis. And if it was caught early, in its earliest stage, it was usually pretty successful as a cure. Where it got a little longer in its stage of development, it was iffy at best. And then there was a horrible death due to madness and hideous pain. Horrible disease, syphilis. And it was called the pox or the calamity.
It's good that you mentioned calamity because I learned something from your book. Because, I mean, all right, let me say that there were like various types of bordellos, right? Now, there were dance hall girls, there were saloon girls, there were crib girls, and hog farm girls. Well, first of all, Wyatt Earp's third wife was a prostitute, but Calamity Jane worked on a hog farm for a long time, and the reason not the reason she did, but the word calamity is a term for syphilis, and I never knew that.
That was one of the terms you got, the calamity. And she worked, she was not very pretty, and she worked at her hog farm. Now, the hog farms are usually set up near military bases, and usually they were the last stop of overage prostitutes. And though some of them may have been hog farms at one time, they were essentially brothels for the military, and ex-soldiers ran them. And there was also a little safety in numbers from the various workers there. And that was quite common throughout the West.
What was a crib called? What
were small little buildings, which were no more than one room with a kind of bathroom attachment and a bed, and the girls would rent this and service people at a low cost. Usually, for a crib girl, the cost was $1.
Mm.
And there were also street prostitutes who would service men in the street, on the street, usually in a doorway, standing up for a quarter, 25 cents, two bits. And,
oh my God!
There was one Western scene I liked. It was it's as hot as a whorehouse on nickel night, but which must have been pretty hot. But I never was able to find any place where they charged just a nickel. It was always at least 25 cents.
Oh, yeah. Big spenders, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but in their time, though, 25 cents was probably equals about $15 of our dollars.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounded like $1 is cheap, but $1 then might have been, 10 or more than our dollars are. So,
well, think about this. In the gold rush, women were charging a pinch of gold, an ounce of gold. That's $650.
Oh,
a session. And they could have 10 sessions a night. So add $600 times 10, that's a pretty good living. And back then, it was like a fortune.
Well, you would think, too, that when they were getting that much money, most of them didn't really care for their job. They're getting it for just doing it for money. But having that much money, they could turn into madams and, have their own bordellos.
Yeah, many of them did. Usually the ones with a few brains in their noggins ended up that way. And they set up what were called parlor houses. Now, the parlor house was the creme de la creme of the brothels. And listen, you had to be rich to go to one of these guys. They were nicely set up. They're beautiful. They had great food, great liquor, great entertainment, and of course, the prettiest and most educated girls, and music, everything a rich man would really want. And they appealed to the wealthy class, and they were usually found in the best parts of town, not in red light district or a saloon, but those were, as I say, you had to be invited there. You had to get a pass to go in to these areas. Then they had the sporting clubs that were a little bit more open to the public. You had to be a member of the club, and they offered entertainment, gambling, good food, great steaks, and of course all subsidized by the girls upstairs who usually performed. And that's how you got to pick them. They would. You ever hear of the dance, the can-can? Sure. The French dance? Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, in the dance, if you recall it, they lift their skirts up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, apparently, they didn't wear any underwear.
That's why they said ooh la la, right?
Yeah, ooh la la is right. And then you could pick. Oh, I think I like the girl on the left there. That's Lulu there. I think I want her. And then you go to the madam who would sell you a chip, a token, a round brass token. The girls never played with any money. They never had contact with money. And then you had to go upstairs and pass a bouncer who would examine your coin, your token, make sure you had one. And then you were allowed upstairs to the right room. Yeah, you had to act like a gentleman. And if you didn't, all the girl had to do was cry out, and the bouncer would come bursting into the room, pull you out wherever state you were in, if you were beating on the girl or being obnoxious, and then they would throw you out the window where you bounce. That's where the bouncer term comes from. And you might break your arm or your leg. They didn't care. Or your neck. They didn't care. And that's what you would do. Anyway, the girl would only do that if he broke any of the rules they had for the brothel. And by the way, the brothel girls were the best educated. They actually had health care programs, retirement accounts. They had the best clothing from France, the best underwear. They were allowed to wear makeup, smoke cigarettes. They could literally do pretty much whatever they wanted. They could wear tattooing on their bodies. They could do all these things that other women were forbidden to do. And they made good money doing it.
And the people that went to them were safer because they had doctors for the prostitutes. Right. And so, because you talked about the thing that most of the time, the girls didn't live much beyond 25 in the olden days. And, that's because catching diseases, addiction, physical harm, all those things. So not all of them were, in a bad way.
Yeah, well, they had good brothels then as now. Check the girls at least once a week. They check to make sure they don't have venereal diseases. Mm-hmm. And if they do, they take care of it. And this, by the way, was done even back then. So if you were a wealthy gentleman, you would go in and you could go there and you were pretty well assured that you wouldn't catch anything. But for the lower class crib girls and stuff like that, they didn't take those sorts of precautions.
They probably didn't have a choice.
Yeah, and during the Civil War, a big chunk of the Union and Confederate armies were down with sexual transmitted diseases, which were quite devastating to them. And of course, this was even true in World War II, where it was estimated that 660 soldiers every day, soldiers, sailors, Marines, came down with venereal disease of one kind or another. Every day this happened.
Yeah, that's, and yet it keeps going on, too.
Yeah, it still does.
Yeah. So you've got some interesting chapters about prostitution in Hollywood's golden age and World War II, and some very famous names who were or rumored to have been working girls before they got famous. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but for some reason I laughed out loud when I read that one of the famous bordellos in Hollywood was a pretty much unlikely place, given all the other places that they could have been used. But it was the gas station at Hollywood and Van Ness. Let's talk about that.
Well, this guy put a trailer in the back, an Airstream trailer, and he serviced all of the various movie stars. It was the hottest place in town. Now, he offered everything. He had a full staff of uniformed boys and girls, you name it, whatever you wanted was right there, and you could hire them. And you park your car to be serviced, and you could be serviced as well. And many of the most famous stars in Hollywood use their services one way or another. Made a lot of money for the guy who owned the place, but always, wherever the story is, as long as it's been a Hollywood, there's been a Hollywood madam. And this started in the silent era, and Lee Francis was the most famous, rented an entire top floor of an apartment building for an elaborate brothel on Sunset Boulevard. And it was the house that Francis built it was just quite wild. I'm told it still is pretty wild in Hollywood, but you just don't talk about it. And of course, the one we know today as the Hollywood Madam is Heidi Fleiss.
Yes.
Who, one rule about being a Hollywood Madam, or any madam, you never tell who your clients were. You keep that mum. And she did. They put her in jail trying to get her to break and give them a list of names, but she never did, so they let her go. And now she's living in Nevada, I believe. But she's a long list of Hollywood madams. Now, women who, you could go to Hollywood and do it the old-fashioned way and do the casting calls and, do acting parts, bit parts, stuff like that. Or you could do it the other way. The other way was to become a prostitute. And if you were good, and you were talented, and you got the right eye, guess what? You could become a movie star. And many of them were. Now, the most famous is Marilyn Monroe, who oddly enough tried out for movies and didn't get in, but she worked there as a prostitute. She even made porn films. Pornographic movies took off with silent era right at the dawn of Hollywood. And all these hookers could get extra jobs working in porn films. And some of them went on. But Marilyn Monroe was a porn star actress. And in fact, when she became big, the studio went and bought all of her pornographic movies and destroyed them. But a couple survived. They're out there still. Others, like Kim Novak, was actually arrested for prostitution in Chicago. And there are stories about Barbara Eden, Tina Louise. Veronica Lake was a prostitute, later ended up as a hooker in New York City after her film career died. Sophia Loren was called La Simpatica in Rome, where she was a prostitute during World War II. But I won't hold that against her. She had to survive. So being in Italy in World War II was not a pleasant situation. So a lot of women who would not have entertained the thought of becoming a hooker were forced into it. So she probably, we'll give her a pass. Raquel Welch actually was worked in a brothel in Tijuana and made porn films. Joan Collins is said to have worked in Hollywood as a hooker. And she was a hooker for Heidi Fleiss, of all things. In fact, there's one interesting story I did a lot of research on. That was Nancy Davis, whom accounts say that she was the BJ Queen of Hollywood. And she became the first lady. So I did a lot of research, and that comes out of a story from the Village Voice. It was printed after her husband became president, and they objected to many of his programs and policies, and a very unsympathetic biography of Nancy Reagan was published, and it listed this as well. Now, is it true? It's hard to say. Hard to say back. Well, she was a victim of the casting couch, and Thalberg put her in. As a matter of fact, she did a screen test along with Marilyn Monroe, who had more talent, actually, than Nancy. But they picked Nancy, and they think it's because of her talents in the bedroom rather than her acting ability. Well, whatever it was, she tamed Ronald out, Ronnie Reagan, who was quite... Hello? Are you there again?
Yep.
Oh, anyway, But I did a lot of research on Nancy Reagan because he can't just accuse the First Lady of being a hooker or the BJ Queen of Hollywood. But there seems to be some evidence that she may well have been a victim of the casting couch.
And on that happy note, wait a minute, we got to go to a break. And, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the nature of the profession was one of vacillating emotions. And so when we come back from the break, you've got some stories from California brothels and some haunted things going on there. And so everybody stay put, and we'll be back in 2 minutes.
There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
I was in the hospital with my son for 18 months.
When he got injured, I wasn't prepared, but I knew I had to be strong.
When I was told about John's injury, I was in complete shock. I just remember rushing into his room and giving him a big hug and letting him know I was there.
These veterans and families are just a few of the heroes we serve at Homes for Our Troops. For thousands of severely injured veterans, everyday life is filled with barriers.
It was really the little things throughout the house. Counters that you can't roll up to. I had to drag my wheelchair down steps.
I want to help, but he is so determined.
At Homes for Our Troops, we build specially adapted custom homes with features like wheelchair access, roll-in showers, and automatic door openers that allow them to function independently and focus on their recovery and family.
This house is freedom. It's hope. It's a new beginning.
This house has given me my family back.
To learn more, visit hfotusa.org.
Throughout time, events have occurred that have shaped human history. Spirit voices from the past have many stories to tell, and for the past several years, channelers Barry and Connie Strom have been conducting live channeling sessions and relaying those stories and messages from those on the other side. We invite you to tune in to Barry and Connie's new show, Channeling History, on the PowerX Radio Network, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, as they relay the messages of those voices from the past, the ones who have witnessed history firsthand, and those who have made history themselves.
Hey everyone, it's Marla. If you like tonight's episode of Stirring the Cauldron and the archive podcast as well, take a look at the show's YouTube channel and check out the dozens of shows that are there just waiting to be heard. New shows are added each week, and while you're there, why not subscribe? It's free. And if you click on that tiny little bell icon at the top of the page, you'll be notified when new shows are available. Just go to youtube.com and then type in Stirring the Cauldron Para X, and the link will appear. Just like magic.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And my guest tonight is Richard Sennett, and we're talking about his book, Soiled Doves and Painted Ladies. And Richard has some really good stories about haunted bordellos, and I'm anxious to hear them, but we did get a question from the chat room about the Black Dahlia.
Okay. Now, that's an interesting case because it's debatable whether she was a hooker or not. But oddly enough, I did a lot of research on the Black Dahlia, and all the indications are there that she was, in fact, a prostitute. Not a very good one, maybe, but she was certainly involved in such things. Now, people say it's tarring her reputation. I don't think so. There was a phenomenon that took place in World War II would give themselves to servicemen in a patriotic gesture. They thought that they were helping the war effort by sleeping with soldiers, sailors, and Marines. It seems that Miss Short, Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia, was one of these victory girls. In fact, she even had preferences. She only liked pilots, Air Force airmen, and so she pretty much selectively had those are her clients. Now, something happened to her in Hollywood. We don't really know. There's a lot of mystery, but all the indications from my study of prostitution seems that she would fit into that category, and may well have been one of her clients or she may have threatened to tell someone or reveal some secret, whatever it was, but she was silenced in a very horrible way. Mm-hmm. But let's get back to the subject at hand. It could be because of the fact that many prostitutes took their own lives or were murdered that they come back as ghosts. There's a hotel in Ventura called the Bella Maggiore. Now, room 17 has been haunted by a ghost woman they call Sylvia Michaels. And they believe she was died in room 17 during World War II. And because of that, people have seen her ghosts there. Ghost hunters have gone there looking and investigating. Of course, I had to stay there. I'm a ghost hunter after all, and examine her account of what happened. And it is a haunted room. In fact, my wife, who's a very psychic woman, refuses to even go in the room anymore. She says it's not good. But people have seen, heard, and felt her climbing into bed with them in that room. They've heard her dancing down the stairs. They've heard her singing. She likes to pinch men on the behind. She was a very wild woman, evidently. And she's best known for her smell, the scent of rose perfume, cheap rose perfume. Prostitutes used that to cover up the scent, the stink of their occupation, the sweat and such. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, she haunts her. And lots of people have had things happen in that particular room. Now, one guy figured, all she needs is a little tender, loving care. And so he bought her a dozen roses and put them in the room. This is for you, Sylvia. And he went to dinner, came back, the roses had all been ripped up and all of the rosebuds put on the bed. Mm. And I had spent the night there, and I've never had anything happen. But I had one weird thing happen. They have a big ceiling fan, and this was in October. We had done a seance, my wife and I, at the inn. And this was about 4 o'clock in the morning. And whenever my wife does a seance, she always takes a long shower, kind of recover from it. It's really rather drastic what she does. She goes into this trance and it's really physically demanding. So she's in taking a shower. I'm in the bed laying down, and the steam is coming out of the bathroom from her hot shower. And I'm looking up, and the big ceiling fan starts to turn, but really slowly, like it's being pushed. Not as if it was turned on, because it was off. And it turned around. I said, boy, that's kind of odd. It went around 3 times and then stopped. And it went around the other direction 3 times.
Wow.
I checked, and the thing doesn't move that way. It was like someone had to push it to make it go in that direction. So that's something I saw with my own eyes, but others have had bizarre, weird things happen, doors opening and closing, things moving around. One team went in there with a Ouija board, something I don't recommend, and they were going to contact Sylvia, and they tried, got nothing, and finally it spelled out one word, B-O-O, boom. She has a sense of humor anyway. And again, I've been in there and smelled that rose perfume. It was so strong, it makes your eyes water.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just one of many ghost stories linked to prostitution that I have. A place you can go and actually do ghost hunting is at Brackenfern Manor up in Lake Arrowhead.
Mm.
And that was owned by the mafia. The Bugsy Siegel set it up. They were trying to get their foot into Hollywood back in the 20s and 30s because Hollywood wouldn't let them in. So they opened this brothel for directors, producers, actors, anyone with a lot of money. And they had it all set up 3 stories tall. Each room had the name of the girl in it. And for the duration, the girls would adopt that name. You know, they're all flowers like Heather and such. And several of the girls, one girl, Heather, took her own life. Now she's rumored to haunt there. Now, a lot of the girls went there hoping that by having sex with a producer, they might be able to have a Hollywood career. Actually, some actually did. It worked, but that was a rarity. So that place is open, and they do ghost hunts over there from time to time. I was there. Of course, I had to go. And yes, we did have a lot of strange things happen in Heather's room. All my equipment went off like a Roman candle. And at first, there was nothing there. Then everything lit up. The e-meters flashed. The K2 went right into the red and never left. It was just bizarre. And my wife felt something touch her and start to like massage her. She left out of the room. It was really a strange experience all the way along. But so that is a haunted brothel you can go to here in California. And they actually do ghost hunt. Now, it's no longer a brothel, obviously, but I've told you can rent the rooms and spend the night there if you should like. Now, a lot of these brothels, by the way, later have become bed and breakfast places. Oddly enough, what does bed and breakfast places supply? Well, a nice place for people, married people, and unmarried too, I suppose, to have sex. And this seems to start resurging something. It gets re-stimulating. And there's a lot of places that are bed and breakfasts have more than a few ghosts linked to them. Like there's a place in Randsburg, little town out in the desert in California, a gold town, almost a ghost town, not quite, little place. And it was quite busy, had thousands of people living there at the turn of the century for the mines. They got all played out. Now it's just a ghost town. But some of the old cribs are for sale. And they believe that one of the madams, Margaret Roberts, haunts the old red cabin that she once used as her base of operations. She was so successful as a hooker, she expanded and hired other hookers and set up more brothels and just kind of retired, only, of course, sleeping with a few regular customers she liked. She's very picky about that. But she had been married, had a son, and her husband had deserted her, just walked out on her. And she later just turned to prostitution as a way to make money because she had to survive, take care of her son. And then later, when she was making money hand over fist as a prostitute, she turned her son over to her mother, who lived in Bakersfield, and had her raise her son, and she would send her money. Now, a lot of prostitutes did that. They would, of course, have children and let their relatives take care of them and pay them amount of money to make sure that they were well taken care of. Now, sometimes children were an opportunity. Like if you had a client who was very rich or famous, you would have his child, and then you would go to him tearfully and said, "Here is your baby. I want money to help raise your son. And God, it became a money-making operation. Of course, this doesn't stop. I mean, Hunter Biden had something like that happen to him when he had sex with a stripper. And lo and behold, she produced a baby. And he said it wasn't his, but DNA proved, it was. and now, of course, she wants money, lots of money. So they became not only children, but they became little money pots. So that sort of thing went on back in the olden days. Long Beach, I was called into Long Beach. Now, Long Beach was a Navy town during World War II, not so much today. Really was back then. And a lot of sailors were there during that Great War. And what does that mean? Sailors meant they get horny. And so brothels were set up. Now, there were two kinds of brothels. There were ones with red lights, and those were for the servicemen. And then there were ones with blue lights for the officers. They didn't go to the same places. And the officers were more like parlor houses, had good, clean girls. Theirs was quality over quantity, whereas the ones for the servicemen were quantity over quality. And so, during World War II, you would go to a brothel, and for $3, you got to stay with a prostitute for 3 minutes. She had an 8 timer. And she would turn the little thing over, and that's all the time you had. She never took her clothes, put her clothes on. She's naked, and you could do whatever you wanted for 3 minutes for your $3.
Oh, geez.
And they lined up for that. And unfortunately, a lot of them got venereal diseases because of that volume that they had. Now, I was asked to investigate a large mansion in Long Beach, and the people called me and said that they were seeing naked women running around the hallways. Now, they believed that the mansion had once been owned by the comedian W.C. Fields. Well, I did some research, and W.C. did not have wild parties. So the Hollywood people did have some wild parties. He wasn't one of them. And then I found that the mansion probably didn't even belong to him. It belonged to somewhere else. That was just a story. But during World War II, it was used as a brothel where sailors would line up outside in the street with their $3 and get their service there. Usually when a ship was about to set sail for the Pacific Theater, the men would go there, and of course some would come down with venereal disease and end up staying in the hospital in California. But during World War II, they had penicillin, and what would have taken 3 to 6 months to cure, they could do in about 5 days, which was a little bit of an advancement. Unfortunately, the venereal disease has grown resistant to penicillin, so it's harder now to control than it was back then. But but this mansion, I did the whole thing, and I later found out that this was a brothel. And yes, some of the girls did take their own wives. There were usually people who came to California seeking a career in the movies and ended up, like so many did and still do, walking the streets as prostitutes.
It's kind of scary. And you didn't write about this in the book, but I was reading something about the Gardens of Allah, on Sunset Boulevard, where everybody stayed. Every name in the book stayed there. But they said something about they were having a little prostitution going on there too. Have you heard about that?
A lot of places did, especially after the 50s. A lot of different places moved into other areas like Beverly Hills. There was a big war between the various mafioso gangs, the Italian mafia versus the Jewish mafia, over who would run the brothels, because they were quite lucrative. Still are, but I'm told. And yeah, a lot of these places ended up as houses of prostitution. And they would change, too. They would move. There would be a house of prostitution for a while. Then they would move somewhere else. The police would get in there. A lot of times the police were corrupt and were paid off by the various madams, making a lot of extra money. A lot of corruption in old L.A. long ago. But who knows? It may still be the case. I do not know. But lots of times the police just said, prostitution is just something that's going to happen. So you might as well just take your cut and close your eyes to what's going down. And that might be what happened there. Lots and lots of places have been used as houses of prostitution. A lot of places in San Francisco, the El Remo Hotel was owned by the mafia, and they have 3 floors dedicated to what were called house parties. That replaced the parlor houses in the Prohibition era. A house party is just a big rented suite, and they would bring in all the girls and the booze and the stuff like that, and you could party hardy, and if you had the money, and then the girls would go home with their money, and the hotel would get a large check for their services. But the El Remo is still open, and it still has ghostly ladies running around there as well.
Are there any famous prostitute ghosts around that are, people talk about it and wonder where?
There's lots of them. That's the whole thing. I talked to a lady who was a ghost hunter. She rented the red cabin that Margaret Roberts was in. She was in there. She felt psychic, very psychic. She got her camera out, took pictures. She even got a picture of a woman, and she was able to compare that with known photographs of Margaret. And she found she had a scar on her face that went through her eyebrow, that meant her eyebrow had a gap in it, the scar. And so they were able to ascertain that this was, in fact, the ghost picture of Margaret. But there's a lot of famous ones. Of course, the most famous is not in California, but in Nevada. Julia Buck, and her name, she's so famous they have streets in Carson City named after. There's a museum in Virginia City, the Museum of Prostitution, about her funeral. She was so well known. Even Mark Twain attended her funeral when she was murdered by an itinerant who broke into her place and robbed her and killed her, strangled her. But she is very famous, and there's lots of people have her name attached to them at Virginia City. Now, one of the reasons she was so famous, she was very, very popular because she gave to the community. She was a member of the volunteer fire department. She gave money to the volunteer firemen to help set things up. She gave fed money to the poor. She had soup kitchens for out-of-work people. She cared for orphans and other ladies of the night who had fallen on hard times. So she was just such a giving person that she was called the Queen of the Comstock, much to the chagrin of all the married women who saw her in a different light. And when she was after she was found, she was given a funeral, but the ladies of the town wouldn't let her be buried in the local cemetery, consecrated ground. So she was buried in a special grave site. And as I say, Mark Twain was even present for her burial, and he was present when they hung the guy who admitted to killing her. So she was quite a famous woman for her day, and now is remembered. Now, up in Marysville, it's a little gold rush town. There's a place called the Silver Dollar Saloon, and it has above it was built inside of an old hotel that was a brothel. They have the brothel museum, the Marysville Brothel Museum. You can go and visit there, and yes, it is said to be haunted. Marysville was a really big town during the gold rush, and there were up to 40 brothels. This was one of the biggest. They had off the saloon. This was not a parlor house. It was more like a sporting club.
Oh.
It was okay. Then of course they had.
Wait, we're gonna have to not tell anymore because time is running out, and that's terrible.
Oh, no, I have so many stories more I could tell you.
Well, we will have you back to do that. Definitely. But just real quick, do you have website information to get out, and where can people find the book?
You got to go to Amazon.com. Amazon.com has it. And I even have a web page, a bookshelf, which lists all of my many books, mostly about ghosts, but a few about history. I have one on World War II, and this one, as well as psychic mysteries, or a variety of different topics, as well as my attempts at fiction.
And they were very good, because I think we talked about it a long time ago when that one book came in, Fade to Black or something. All right, yeah. I got to shut up. Yeah, they're going to put the hook on me and get me out of here. So thank you, Richard. Please come back. And it's always a pleasure to have you. And I want to thank everybody who is listening in at all tonight. And the next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.